They said it was ours. But the air in that room already knew the truth. The walls still smelled like my sweat, late nights, half-burned coffee, the echo of music that once belonged to me. Yet when I stepped inside, my sister's name had replaced mine on every label, every folder, every whispered conversation. My parents stood by the door like it was a ceremony. "Zoe, we thought we'd turn this into a family thing," my mother said, her tone light but her eyes avoiding mine. My father added, "You've built something strong. It's only fair the whole family shares it." Shares it. That word tore through me like a dull blade. I'd built the studio from scraps. I'd sold sketches, skipped meals, slept under the mixing table when I couldn't afford rent. It wasn't a gift. It was survival, born from every moment they told me I'd never make it. Now they wanted to rename my resilience as cooperation. They wanted to disguise their theft as unity. I looked at my sister. She stood there with my logo on her shirt, smiling the way thieves smile when they know you can't prove the crime. That's when I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was choreography. A quiet, rehearsed betrayal in perfect family harmony. My father's voice echoed, "Don't make this difficult, Zoe. We're family." But in that moment, the word family stopped meaning love. It meant ownership. It meant silence. The walls around me began to hum. Not with music this time, but with the weight of what was taken. That was the day I buried the version of me that believed in forgiveness. That was the day my story stopped being about ambition and started being about retaliation, because when they stole my studio, they didn't just take my work, they declared war on the only thing I had ever built for myself. And wars, once started, never stay silent for long. Every family tells a story to keep itself alive. Ours was simple: we're stronger together. They repeated it at dinners, birthdays, and every gathering that felt more like a performance than a celebration. My father would raise his glass and say, "Family first, everything else second." My mother would smile like a priest reciting scripture. My sister would nod, always the favorite disciple. But no one ever said what together actually meant. It didn't mean unity. It meant control. It meant obedience disguised as belonging. The family was never about blood. It was about ownership. My father owned our choices. My mother owned our silence. And my sister, she owned the attention they never had the courage to give me. When I built the studio, I broke the myth. I built something outside their orbit, something that didn't need their approval or protection. And that scared them more than failure ever could. Because in families like ours, success isn't meant to be independent. It's meant to be collective, as long as the credit flows upward. So they came for it, slowly. Sweetly, my mother began visiting the studio, bringing tea and ideas. My father offered advice on finances, and my sister? She lingered near the microphone, pretending to learn, pretending to care. Every act was a thread, small, harmless, until I looked up one day and realized they'd woven a web around me. I was no longer the owner. I was the worker. And they were the brand. That's the danger of myths. They don't need to be true to control you. They just need to be repeated. When I confronted them, my father said softly, "Zoe, this is how families grow. You can't do everything alone." But what he meant was, you can't do anything without us. And when I refused to bend, the warmth in his voice cracked like ice. That night, I stopped calling it my family. I started calling it the system. Because once you see the myth for what it is, you stop being their daughter and start becoming their threat. It didn't happen overnight. Betrayal rarely does. It begins with small gestures, invisible at first, a helpful signature on a document, a phone call made in your name, a meeting you weren't invited to, but were spoken for in. That's how it started. My father called it streamlining. He said, "Let's simplify your workload, Zoe. We'll handle the paperwork so you can focus on creating." He said it like a gift, and I, exhausted from weeks of all-nighters, accepted it, not realizing I was signing away the very air I breathed. Then came my mother. Her words were wrapped in silk and sympathy. "Sweetheart, your sister's just trying to help. She admires you, you know. She could learn so much if you let her shadow you." Shadow? That word would become prophecy. My sister started showing up early, to organize. Soon she was making calls, managing clients, rebranding our image. Within weeks she had access to my files, my contracts, my passwords. When I questioned it, she smiled. "Dad said it's fine. We're partners now, remember?" Partners. That word kept echoing, the way a lock clicks shut. One night I stayed late after everyone left. My laptop was still logged in. I checked my emails. That's when I saw it. Forwarded invoices, re-signed agreements, a new management structure. File. Every document replaced my name with hers. I sat there numb. The signatures looked almost identical to mine. Almost. My mother's voice played in my head. Family doesn't need to ask permission. And I realized that's what they'd been building all along. A family empire, built on my labor, my name, my silence. They didn't steal my studio in a single act. They built a system that erased me slowly enough to make me doubt I ever existed there at all. And by the time I saw it clearly, it was too late to ask for justice, because I was no longer an owner. I was an employee, in a company that used my own name as its foundation. Betrayal, I learned, isn't improvised. It's rehearsed. Every conversation, every innocent visit, every reassuring smile. They were lines in a play I never agreed to perform in. When I looked back, the signs had been there. Months before the takeover, my parents had started speaking in drafts. Maybe one day we'll all work together. It'd be nice if your sister had a place in your studio. At the time, it sounded like pride. Now I hear it for what it was, preconditioning. They were softening the edges of the future they had already chosen. The family partnership wasn't an idea. They'd been memorizing it like scripture. My sister had her role too. The curious apprentice, the humble learner. She'd ask, "How do you price your clients?" Or "What software do you use?" Each question a note in the symphony they were composing behind my back. And me? I was the audience and the funding. When the curtain finally rose, the day they called the meeting, I realized I'd been watching the rehearsal for months. Every silence from my mother was timing. Every pause from my father was stage direction. Even my own doubts were dialogue cues they had written for me. The family meeting itself felt scripted. Dad opened with the practiced calm of a CEO. "Zoe, your sister's proven herself these past months. We think it's time to make things official." Mom added the emotional hook. "This was always meant to be shared, darling. You've worked so hard. Now let it be a family dream." A family dream built on my exhaustion. A partnership born from plagiarism. That was the moment the script cracked. I didn't read my line. I didn't smile or nod. Instead, I said nothing. The silence felt heavier than any word I could have spoken. It was the first time I realized I didn't have to play their part anymore. Their eyes flickered, just for a moment, because nothing terrifies directors more than when the actor walks off stage. Silence is underrated. It unnerves people who live on control. After that meeting, I stopped arguing, stopped defending myself, stopped explaining why the studio was mine. Instead, I listened. Because silence, when used correctly, becomes a weapon sharper than truth. They mistook my quiet for surrender. My father relaxed, convinced the rebellion was over. My mother spoke to me again in that syrupy tone, all fake compassion and half smiles. And my sister, she glowed. She believed she had won, but I had learned something about power. It doesn't vanish when stolen. It waits. I began to move like a ghost through the studio, present but unseen. I learned to read every glance, every unfinished sentence. I memorized the passwords they changed. I photographed the documents they hid. I saved the emails they accidentally deleted. I didn't fight their story anymore. I was writing my own. At night, I would sit in the empty studio, lights dimmed, listening to the hum of machines I'd once built with my bare hands. I realized that creation and destruction share the same tools: precision, patience, timing. They thought they had taken everything, but they had forgotten the most dangerous part of me, the part that remembers, the part that waits. I began to nod during meetings, agree to every idea. "Yes, Mom, that's great." "Sure, Dad, I'll send the files." "Of course, sis, take the lead." Every approval was bait. Every smile was camouflage, because silence isn't absence, it's strategy, and every system, no matter how airtight, has one flaw. It trusts the silence of those it believes it owns. They built their empire on the illusion that I had given up. And I let them believe it. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, and the quiet ticking of a clock, counting down to collapse. Every empire collapses from the inside first. The cracks don't roar, they whisper. It started small. An invoice my sister forgot to forward. A client who called me directly, confused about the new management. My father's temper rising when numbers didn't match. my mother smoothing everything over with the same brittle smile that had once fooled me. I didn't need to expose them. They were doing it themselves. Greed has a frequency, and once you learn its pitch, you can hear when it begins to feed on itself. My sister wanted recognition. My father wanted control. My mother wanted peace, no matter who had to bleed for it. I gave them all what they wanted. A compliment here, a small victory there. Let them believe the world finally revolved around their brilliance. Meanwhile, I took notes, quietly building a map of every inconsistency, every lie disguised as strategy. The studio meetings grew tense. My father blamed my sister for missing clients. My sister accused him of micromanaging. My mother played mediator, but her eyes had that distant glaze of someone trying to keep a mask from slipping. That's the thing about control. It only feels secure until it's shared. Then it becomes chaos. One night, I overheard my parents arguing. My father said, "She doesn't even care about the business." My mother whispered, "We can't push Zoe too far. She still owns the name." The name, my name, it was still registered under me. That was their fault line, the foundation they'd overlooked in their rush to conquer. I remember sitting alone after that, the studio lights flickering like candles before a storm. They thought I was powerless. But the truth was simpler. I was patient. And patience, when fed by betrayal, becomes prophecy. The family empire was already cracking. All I had to do was wait for gravity to do the rest. I didn't need to destroy them. I only needed to let the truth breathe. Once you stop defending yourself, you start seeing patterns you never could before. The lies they tell, the excuses they recycle, the fear that fuels every decision. It's all architecture, and architecture can be undone. I began sketching a map of their empire. Not on paper, but in observation. Who handled what, where the money went, who was truly indispensable. It wasn't them. The studio had grown because of my sound, my designs, my relationships with clients. I was the current they'd built their dam around. But the current doesn't stop. It only reroutes. Quietly, I began reconnecting with people who remembered me. Collaborators, clients, partners who'd gone silent after my partnership. I didn't complain. I didn't explain. I just showed up, listened, delivered. Every new project I took on outside the studio was a seed, and every seed was planted in the cracks of the old structure. Meanwhile, the tension inside the studio grew louder. My sister's pride turned brittle. She wanted recognition but couldn't produce results. My father tightened control. My mother tried to glue the chaos with sentiment. All I did was mirror their words back to them. "I trust your decision." "You're right, maybe this isn't my space anymore." Each phrase sounded like surrender, but it was blueprint, because power doesn't always return in noise. Sometimes it returns in absence. I started saving every document, every client testimony, every proof of authorship under my name, and one by one, people began to notice who really built what. By the time my family realized it, their foundation was hollow. The brand they'd claimed was losing value, not from attack, but from truth. The studio that once erased me had become a ghost of itself, and I was no longer its prisoner. I was its origin story, and its lesson. Truth never stays buried. It hums beneath the floorboards until someone finally listens. For months, I'd been working in the shadows. Small projects, late-night edits, music that carried my signature even when my name was missing. And then, one morning, a client tagged me online. "Produced by Zoe." Just 2 words, but they traveled fast. Within days, my inbox filled again. Old partners reached out, remembering the sound that used to pull people into the studio before it became a brand. I didn't advertise. I just let the work breathe in open air, free of the suffocating idea of family. That was enough. At the next family meeting, my father's voice trembled under its usual calm. He said the studio's reputation was splintering. My sister called it disloyal competition. I called it oxygen. They asked me to clarify things publicly, to say that all new projects were studio collaborations. I smiled and said, "Of course." Then I released another track, this time under my full name. No studio tag, no partnership. Just me. The silence afterward was deafening. Not anger, fear, because the illusion of ownership only survives when the real creator forgets she can create elsewhere. Soon, others started whispering about what had really happened. Clients began pulling out quietly, seeking the authenticity that had vanished from the family's empire. The myth of unity began to rot in the light. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Exposure isn't vengeance. It's revelation. Watching them struggle to contain the story was like watching smoke try to hide fire. They couldn't erase me anymore because I'd stopped trying to belong, and for the first time in years I didn't feel small. I felt seen. By no one and everyone. By the world that finally recognized the sound behind the silence. The echo had returned to its source. There comes a point when silence stops being strategy and becomes statement. They asked me to come in early. No clients, no staff. Just the three of them, and the studio lights humming like interrogation lamps. The same room where it had all begun. My father stood first. "We need to settle this," he said. His voice tried for authority, but the confidence had cracks in it. My mother clutched her tea as if warmth could fix what truth had already cooled. And my sister. Her eyes carried the tremor of someone who'd finally realized what she'd lost. I didn't sit. I wanted them to feel the distance. Dad began listing numbers, rights, reputations. Mom talked about family, forgiveness, optics. My sister said nothing. Maybe she finally understood that imitation can't outlive authenticity. When they finished, I spoke. "This studio was never about walls or equipment," I said. "It was about the sound that lived in me. You tried to brand it, but you can't own breath. You can't trademark heartbeat." No one interrupted. Even the machines seemed to pause. I placed a folder on the table. Every legal record, every copyright, every proof of origin that tied the brand back to me. They looked at it like it was a mirror showing them something they'd refused to see. "I'm not here for revenge," I said quietly. "I'm here for separation. You can keep the building, the name, the illusion. I'll keep the truth." For the first time, my father had no response. My mother's shoulders sagged, her rehearsed grace dissolved. My sister's lips parted, but no apology came, just a small, broken exhale. I walked out. No door slam, no final line, just footsteps fading down the hallway that used to echo with everything they'd taken. Outside, the morning light felt almost too clean. And in that light, I realized the confrontation hadn't been about reclaiming space. It had been about reclaiming self. Freedom didn't arrive with applause. It came quietly, like dawn. Soft, certain, undeniable. For the first time in years, I woke without the weight of explanation. No family calls, no schedules I didn't make, no walls that whispered of what had been taken. The silence was different now. Not strategy. Peace. I rented a small space on the edge of the city. Bare floors, cracked windows, no logo on the door. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was mine. I set up my old keyboard, the same one I'd saved from the original studio. When my fingers touched the keys, the sound that filled the room wasn't polished or perfect. It was raw, human, alive. Creation had returned. I began producing again, not for clients, not for recognition, but for the simple act of hearing something new exist because I willed it to. Each track carried a piece of the past. Echoes of betrayal turned into rhythm. Loss converted into tone. And slowly people began to find me again. Not through ads or press releases, but through word of mouth. They said the music sounded different, like freedom had texture. One night, as I watched the city lights flicker against the windows, I realized something profound. They hadn't stolen my dream. They had refined it. By breaking it, they had shown me what was unbreakable. The studio I lost was built from ambition. The one I rebuilt was born of understanding. I didn't need to erase their names from history. Their chapter simply ended where mine began again. And somewhere in the distance, I imagined my sister hearing one of my new songs, recognizing melody she could never replicate. Not out of cruelty, but as truth. Because what's real doesn't need to be reclaimed. It just needs space to breathe again. That was my return, not to the past, but to myself. Every family passes something down. Some inherit houses, heirlooms, or debt. I inherited silence. For generations, silence had been the glue that kept our image intact. Don't question your father. Don't embarrass your mother. Don't compete with your sister. And above all, don't speak when something feels wrong. But silence isn't always obedience. Sometimes it's the sound of a legacy being rewritten. When I walked away, I thought I was escaping them. But what I was really doing was unlearning the inheritance. The idea that love requires erasure, that belonging means shrinking, that power is something you steal instead of something you grow. The new studio taught me otherwise. Every note I played was a rebellion against that inheritance. Every collaboration built on respect instead of guilt became an act of healing. And with time, I realized I wasn't reversing the family legacy. I was redefining. Gee, legacy doesn't have to mean lineage. It can mean influence. It can mean creating something that ends the pattern instead of continuing it. One evening, a young artist came to record. She told me she'd been following my work since the family studio days. She said, "You showed me that you can leave and still win." Her words stayed with me because that's what legacy should be, not something you're trapped in, but something that frees others when they see you walk through the fire and survive. I used to think revenge meant watching them fall. Now I understand. The real revenge is evolution. When you grow beyond the system that tried to contain you, you make their power irrelevant. That's legacy in reverse. It doesn't destroy the past, it transforms it into a lesson. Apologies don't always arrive wrapped in words. Sometimes they show up as silence, the kind that follows realization. Months had passed since that final meeting. No messages, no visits, no let's talk. And for once, I didn't wait for any. But one morning, a letter arrived. Not from my parents, from a lawyer. It wasn't confrontation, it was closure. They were formally transferring all my creative rights back to me. No explanation, no signature beyond the legal necessity. I stared at the document, expecting emotion. Anger, triumph, something. But what I felt instead was relief. A quiet recognition that I'd already moved on. Long before they decided to let go. I didn't need their apology. The universe had already delivered it in its own language. The apology was in the silence of their pride. In the empty press releases that no one read anymore. In the way the city now called my name. Not theirs. It was in my mother's old friend visiting my studio one afternoon. Her tone hesitant but warm. "Your mom's been talking about your success. She's proud, you know." That was the apology. Not in sentences, but in softened tones. My sister, too, sent a song one day. Just a simple demo track titled Home, no message attached, no explanation. But I listened, and for the first time I didn't hear competition. I heard recognition, like she finally understood what I'd been trying to protect all along. Forgiveness doesn't always need permission. Sometimes it's a one-person act, a decision to stop carrying the weight of what others never learned to say. That's what the unwritten apology taught me. Closure doesn't arrive in conversation, it arrives in transformation. One night, when the world felt particularly still, I opened an old hard drive, the one labeled Studio A, Early Sessions. I hadn't listened to those tracks in years. They were rough, unmastered, full of mistakes I used to hate. But as I pressed play, the sound that filled the room felt honest. There was something pure in the imperfection. Back then, I didn't realize it, but every melody carried a secret message. A warning, a whisper, a piece of the truth I wasn't ready to face. In one track, my voice trembled. At the time, I'd blamed fatigue. Now I knew it wasn't tiredness, it was resistance, a quiet protest against being controlled. In another, I could hear my sister laughing faintly in the background. It used to irritate me, now it made me smile. That laugh reminded me of the time before everything fractured, when we still believed family meant safety, and not strategy. I listened to hours of music that night. Every sound was a breadcrumb leading me back to myself. And when the final track ended, I realized something that made me catch my breath. The story I thought began with betrayal had actually started long before. The moment I learned to create something no one could steal. Art doesn't lie, even when you do. Even when you tell yourself you're fine, your work remembers the truth for you. It holds the echoes of what you can't say out loud. It preserves the pain until you're strong enough to listen. By dawn, I was sent crying. I was grateful, because those echoes had kept me alive. Even when I didn't know I was breaking, they never lied. They just waited, and now, finally, I was ready to hear them. There's a sound most people never notice. The one that comes after you've forgiven everything. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists. Soft, whole, undeniable. That's what silence felt like now. Not emptiness. Completion. I used to fill every quiet space with noise. Music, movement, conversation. Because silence scared me. It reminded me of being ignored, dismissed, replaced. But one morning I sat in my studio. No instruments, no screens, no distractions, and realized the silence was no longer my enemy, it was my collaborator. In that stillness, I began hearing something new, melodies that weren't rushed, words that didn't beg to be heard, a rhythm that breathed on its own. Peace had a tempo. It wasn't fast, it was steady, like the heartbeat of someone who'd stopped running. I recorded a track that day called When Silence Sings. No vocals, just soft piano, open air, and the faint echo of breath. It became my most streamed piece. People said it made them feel safe, calm, seen. That's when I realized what had truly changed. My music wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't resistance or revenge. It was resonance. Because peace isn't passive. It's powerful. It's the sound of survival evolving into art. Silence had become my teacher, showing me that the loudest victories are often the quietest. And as I listened back to the track, I smiled through the stillness. Because I finally understood. When you stop needing the world to hear you, sound only she could make. Because real power isn't in reclaiming what was stolen. It's in creating something that can never be touched again. The girl they silenced became the woman whose silence sang. And that song became her legacy. So if you've ever been replaced, overlooked, or written out of your own story, remember this. You don't need to fight to be seen. You just need to stand where your truth can breathe. Because in the end, the most powerful revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and doing it without hate,